This is a recording of one Bachelor of Applied Science and Sustainable Practices capstone presentation from the spring of 2022. This project is Waste Ambassadors, a project continuing the efforts to reduce waste on campus and educate about proper waste sorting and disposal.
All right, so the three main goals of our project was to encourage Cascadia to reduce single-use plastics on campus. The second goal is to reduce contamination at the triple bin waste stations. And the third was to implement a green equity fund. And here we're just going to give a brief overview of the two main resources that were the most useful to us. This first one right here is a report published by the Oceania Conservation Association, and it talks about the detrimental effects plastic pollution is placing on the ocean. And this resource was so important to us because it gave concrete and reliable data to use as background research in our final report. And then that little graphic was pulled straight from the report, and it just shows the impact plastic pollution has on wildlife as they are ingesting it or becoming entangled. All right, and this second source is a guide made for students who want to reduce plastic waste at their schools. And this was particularly useful for us because it gave us step-by-step instructions on how to reduce plastic waste, monitor the waste stream, and conduct waste audits on campus.
Okay, so these are the main steps we took in implementing the project. The first thing we did, we had to determine, what we had to do is determine the project scope and finalize our project goals. Because we chose to work as a team, this allowed us to expand the scope of the project and commit to 3 goals that were guided by one theme, becoming a more sustainable campus by reducing waste. We began monitoring the campus waste stream in October 2021 by performing biweekly waste audits. This comprised of visiting the 11 triple bin waste stations in CC1, CC2, and CC3, and reporting the counts of contamination and the weight. Next, over winter break, we began working on creating 10 new signs. These were introduced in January of this year. After the new signs were introduced, we continued to perform the waste audits and monitor the rate of contamination in the triple bin waste stations. Over the span of the winter and spring quarters, we discussed the implementation of compostable foodware with the director of the Cascadia College Foundation, Mark Collins. And finally, our final step was presenting a Green Equity Fund proposal to EAB, the Events and Advocacy Board. A Green Equity Fund is essentially a fund used to finance student-led sustainability and equity-related projects on campus. So to start, we had to research how to perform a waste audit and Cascadia's process for implementing a student-initiated fee. We were inspired by UW-Bethel's compostable foodware mandate and wanted to know why they implemented sustainable foodware options. After which we finalized our project goals. The waste audits spanned between October 2021 and April 2022. We completed 11 waste audits total. We created 10 new adaptive signs to hang above the triple bin waste stations in CC1, CC2, and CC3. And we collected the data from the waste audits and analyzed it to see if the new signage had any impact. And together with Sustainability Club, we visited EAB and presented our Green Equity Fund proposal. So here are just some photos showing the process of creating the signs, as well as hanging the signs. The photo there on the right is in CC1.
Probably seen them around campus, hopefully noticed.
Yeah, and then here's just some more pictures.
All right, so now just an overview of the expenses incurred, including time and money for the budget. So overall, the staff hours, we spent 233.7 hours combined. And here's a pie chart that displays the different hours spent on various aspects of the project. As you can see, that big green slice is the time spent on the final report. And then second, most time was creating the final presentation and conducting the waste audits. Okay, here is the budget. This project cost an estimated total of $991, with most of the money being spent on materials used for the waste audits. And luckily, we had very generous stakeholders who cared about our project and were able to supply us with all of the materials we needed. And I would just like to give a special thank you and shout out to Oceana for being such a big supporter and helping us acquire many of the materials.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll be speaking about our goals again and the results we achieved. So for the first one, unfortunately, we were not successful in implementing a compostable foodware mandate. The owner of Stopwatch Espresso is not willing to switch to compostables or reduce the use of single-use plastics. One of the reasons cited by the owner was finding affordable alternatives is challenging, and with business being slow in the winter quarter due to virtual learning. However, even with the campus reopening in the spring quarter and there being an increase in people on campus, the owner is still not willing to make the switch to compostables. So the data collected throughout the waste audits suggests that the updated signage was successful in reducing contamination at the triple bin waste stations. We saw a decrease in contamination in the trash and compost bins, but saw an increase in contamination in the recycling bins. The switch from virtual to in-person learning saw an increase in the observed counts of contamination, but there was still a decrease in the rates of contamination, at least in the trash and compost bins. The increased student presence can offer an explanation for the increase in the counts of liquid and food contamination in the recycling bins after the sign placement. And here are just some of the common plastic items that we found in our waste audits. Oftentimes it's beverage cups and lids, straws, snack wrappers from candy, chips, crackers, stuff like that. Plastic bottles and utensils and single-use plastics like Ziploc baggies, plastic wraps, stuff like that. And so for the Green Equity Fund, we collaborated with Sustainability Club to develop a proposal and create a presentation to EAB to petition for their endorsement. However, due to the presentation being scheduled so close to the end of the quarter, there was not sufficient time to receive and respond to EAB's feedback and requests. Therefore, at the moment, EAB is not ready to make a decision to support the Green Equity Fund. But regardless, this is the first year that this fund has been presented to EAB leaders. And with the support of the Sustainability Club, we are hopeful that students will continue to support and encourage the implementation of a green fee and commit to creating opportunities for students to generate meaningful and impactful sustainable changes in the campus community. So these are some of the challenges we experienced throughout the project. One was signage discrepancies on the Recology signs. Recology is our main waste hauler. For example, we know that Starbucks cups are not truly recyclable due to the coating inside the cups, but Recology signs has cups with the Starbucks logo on the recycling sign. We learned later that Starbucks works with Recology to collect their cups, even though they're not technically recyclable. Another challenge was the current contract between Stopwatch Espresso. The contract between the cafe and Cascadia preceded our attempts to have the business switch to using compostables. It also precedes the college's updated values and missions statement that has the sustainable commitments. And then sign maintenance was another challenge. Initially, the signs were hung using blue painter's tape, which was not really suitable for long-term adhesion, nor could it manage the weight of the fixtures, especially the really large ones. We had to retape and maintain the signs for weeks following their placement until we switched to using a more sturdy adhesive.
All right, now to highlight a couple of the lessons we learned throughout the course of our project. This first would be that influencing behavior is difficult if the proposed action is not easy to follow through with. And we saw this with liquid contamination across recycling bins because there's not a convenient place to dispose of liquid at most triple bin stations. So our signs would explain that recyclables need to be rinsed out and virtually clean when they're put into the bin. But since most of the stations didn't have, let's just say, a sink right next to them, there's no way that people are just going to go to the bathroom. It's too inconvenient. So something we learned and would hopefully try to tackle in the future. We also learned there needs to be more transparency about permitted and restricted items for composting at Cedar Grove. Recology is contracted with Cedar Grove, so Recology picks up our compost, but then they give it to Cedar Grove to actually take care of. And Cedar Grove has specific requirements for commercially compostable items, but these requirements are not explicitly posted at Recology signs on our campus. So it can cause confusion and cause the wrong items to get into our bins. And the third lesson learned is that the implementation of compostable foodware needs to continue to be pushed by the college. Cascadia cannot meet its 2020 through 2022 sustainability goals if operations on campus do not align with the sustainability plan. So the Waste Ambassadors Project, I don't think I've actually said the name of it. That's what our project is called. Supports 3 resiliency principles to help plan for resiliency and account for impact. So through the addition of adaptive signage, we are helping broaden campus participation in waste sorting and minimizing food waste. Secondly, we are encouraging student innovation and learning with the Green Equity Fund proposal. And lastly, this project pushed us as leaders to make connections with people of different backgrounds and bring together different campus departments that don't normally interact with each other. Also, it involved a diverse group of stakeholders throughout various stages of its lifetime. And this type of connectivity is very important because the more people who are on board with the project, the more support the project goals will have in times of need. All right, now for contributions to sustainability. Our project supports various of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs for short. The project supports these goals by encouraging sustainability on campus through an integrated system of approaches that involve reducing waste, educating the campus community, and implementing new policies. Each one of these approaches relates to specific targets within the SDGs, which are highlighted on this page. All right, thank you everyone for listening. Open to questions whenever.